our Wednesday evening habit, Direct Line, presented by the Montgomery County Republican Club. And your host tonight, Mark Unkefer. Take it away.
And I'm here with my two co-hosts, Jackie Saxton and Don Irvine. And our guest tonight is Al Mendelsohn, who has just been elected second vice chair of the state party. He is formerly the Baltimore County chair, but he hails from Montgomery County. And you got involved in Montgomery County politics when?
1976 for Jerry Ford. That was my introduction to politics. Somebody said, "Do you want a sticker?" And I said yes. And then from there, they wouldn't leave me alone until I was knocking on some doors.
They always bring you in with the freebies, and then they got you.
That's exactly right, and that's and we have to remember that message.
Yeah,
I didn't realize there was I know about the young Republicans, and I know about the college Republicans, and I know about the teenage Republicans, but the kindergarten Republicans, is that when you joined?
Actually, I was 14, but just so you know, there used to be a group called the Stars, which is the sub-teenage Republicans.
Yeah, we got the Wires had somebody reach out this year to make phone calls who was from like middle schoolers for Trump or something like that. So they start them young. And
actually, in 1980, I hadn't started college yet. I was starting in September. And the college Republicans adopted me because I had more in common with the young college than with the older young Republicans, which had that was more of a young professional base. So it was a great introduction all the way around. And many of these people are still friends, not just Facebook version of friends, but people who I miss having Christmas parties with.
Now, you were in Montgomery County at that time, right?
Yeah.
And who else were you kind of that generation were you with?
Joe Suarez, Pam Mandel. I don't think any of these folks are around. Bob, you're for the Montgomery County former chair, Bob Clark.
Bob Clark, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, Brian Barry. And then a few years later, along came Dave Bosse.
Right. I was trying to pull that out of you. It was really tough. You was like, I'm trying to give this guy a setup, and he's just fighting it like crazy. I'll tell you.
Well, Dave and I met in 85, 86, and I had already transferred to Towson. I had gone to school in Georgia for 3 years, then College Park for a year, and then I transferred to Towson.
Okay, well, we'll come back to Georgia a little later because I know Jackie is going to be on the way. But Jackie, you must have some questions about his early involvement with the auxiliary groups, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I am the current Wire National Committee woman, so it is interesting to see how you make that transition from YRs to the state party at large, and how do you stay involved? And we get people that eventually age out and they want to know how to stay involved. I at least plan on staying in Maryland for a long time. I like it here. It's not too bad. So what was that transition like for you?
We had some this is always surprising. We had some turmoil in the YRs, and
really,
and, it happened. It happened from time to time. And I ran for office. I lost in the primary for the House of Delegates. Mike Burns beat me, actually, as well as 3 other people. I came in fifth in a six-way field. But I've discovered that there are a lot of fun things going on, but it turns out that there really aren't a whole lot of auxiliaries, with the exception of the Republican women. Other than the YRs and the CRs. So it kind of forces you to run for Central Committee and then try to build up a group of friends from that. And that's what I've been working on for years, is collecting friends.
So the auxiliaries then are something that are very close to your heart. You have a lot of personal experience there. So what's your thoughts on now that you are on the state board on keeping those auxiliaries, engaged and I know that there are people out there asking if they're going to be able to get a vote and have a voice. So what's your take on all of that?
Well, as far as getting them involved, it's essential. You know, I was looking at exit polling today in this last election. If it President Trump lost in no small measure because of first-time voters and young people. And if we don't find a way of reversing that, we're not going to win. But the important part is not for us to change our beliefs. We've got to find a way to change our messaging. And the more we reach out to young people, and by the way, you don't need me to tell you how to talk to young people because I've forgotten. I'm almost as bad as Unkefer. But what we have to do is we have to help you make that connection, whether it's by helping you find the technologies, whether it's helping you know where events are. But if we just leave it to the colleges and the universities professors, we're going to lose. It's going to be the 1619 project as the way that we teach America. But if the young Republicans and the college Republicans have great events, and those great events have to have some social underpinning, because let's face it, the young people don't want to just sit through another class. They want to have fun. And this is a great chance to have fun. And we should be reaching out to other groups, whether it's through Chamber of Commerce, in the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which is essentially, in many areas, that's almost like having another CR chapter, just like Future Farmers of America. That's like having another YR and CR chapter. But we've got to win this war. President Reagan, up until Joe Biden, had a higher percentage of the youth vote of any president in American history. And when you think about it, it's not because he was their age. Joe Biden and Ronald Reagan were two very senior people when they became president. Biden captured that vote by fear, and Reagan captured that vote by having a belief in the future of America. And we have to be the ones that believe in the future of America.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the research that I've seen demographic wise is saying that Gen Z, which will be, I think their first presidential election will be in 2024 for a big chunk of them. A lot of them actually tend to be leaning more conservative than you would think, which shocked me. I thought that, and I guess that just comes from being in the echo chamber of a college environment. It seems like all of the young people are Bernie bros and socialists. So it's a little bit heartening to see that there is a little bit of hope now, and we just need to keep them, keep the young people engaged. And honestly, I think that we're in a prime opportunity to be reaching out to minority voters in terms of, the African-American vote, as well as the Latino vote as well.
It's interesting, Al. I know you've worked in Baltimore and been chairman up there, and I'm struck with the auxiliary groups. There's this tension between this notion that if you have people who are, how shall I say, non-traditional Republican candidates, that also implies that somehow you have to change what you're saying and change your position on the issues. But as I'm hearing you, you're saying that's not the case. It's really just a question of talking the sort of using the same principles, the same values, but expressing them in a more contemporary way.
Absolutely. So whether you believe in gun rights because you want a chance to target shoot or to go hunting, or you want a firearm in the inner city because you're trying to protect your family, you both have something in common. You both believe in that the Second Amendment to the Constitution actually means something. The same people who believe in religious freedom, who are fundamentalist Protestants, are the same one, or they share a belief with the Muslim community in the inner city that they should have a right to have charter schools. So we've got to find we've got to find points of agreement. I mentioned exit polls earlier. Almost 20% of Americans whose single most important issue was abortion voted for Joe Biden. About 15% of people who had guns as their number one issue voted for Joe Biden. 8% of people who consider themselves conservative or are very conservative voted for Joe Biden. We've got to find a way to, kick these people in the shins and say, let's look at the things that we agree with and move forward together.
Al, one of the big challenges in the party in Maryland has been that, how shall I say, we straddle some very different terrains. So there are parts of the state that are hopelessly blue, and then there are parts of the state that are very, very red. And so sometimes the challenge is how do you balance that in terms of resources?
Well, and I know the natural inclination is to say, here's how we're going to spread to Western Maryland and to the Eastern Shore. I think what we need to do is bring some of the common sense from the other side of the bay and from Frederick County West. Now, I'm not hopelessly optimistic, but I am optimistic. But I don't believe that we're going to convince Baltimore City to become a Republican bastion anytime soon. But we have a lot to learn from some of our non-central part of Maryland. The shore is doing lots of things right. Garrett County has been a majority Republican really since 1868 when it.
Right.
So we need to follow some of their lead. But if we want to win statewide, we have to be conservative enough to the non-core part of Maryland that they'll still show up, but not so conservative that we're going to lose in big numbers in Montgomery and Prince George's and Howard and Baltimore City. And that's how Larry Hogan won. Larry Hogan is not going to get elected governor of Idaho, but he wasn't running for governor of Idaho. I personally wish we could get, somebody, that fits in with Idaho, but it's not going to happen. So we have to massage our message. We have to find people who could work with us to get elected. The purpose of a party is not a debating society. We've got debating societies. That the Greens and the Libertarians have forgotten the purpose of elective politics, which is to get elected. Republicans and Democrats realize that if you don't win, you don't have a seat at the table. So we have to find candidates that are willing to reach out. And by the way, those candidates should profile a lot of their areas. When you go into Howard County, it's got amongst the highest Asian population in America. You go to Prince George's County, it's got the most affluent African American in the country, other than in Beverly Hills.
What I'm hearing is that I should run for office in Montgomery County because I'm Jewish.
I'm sorry, would you say that again, please?
What I'm hearing is that I should run for office in Montgomery County because I'm Jewish.
No, you should run for office from Baltimore County because you think you could improve the people of Montgomery County's life. The fact that you're Jewish, and I'm active with the Republican Jewish Coalition because, as you know, I'm Jewish also. It makes sense that people want to work with people like themselves. Every salesperson will tell you that people want to buy from people like themselves. So we've got to be selling to that crowd.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and to your point about what we can learn from the Republican parts of the state, it seems like what we're looking at in those areas are smaller communities that are, I mean, they have that small town feel. These people are like one big family. You know all your neighbors' names. You know the people that you're living with. Whereas when you go to deep blue places like Baltimore City, like Montgomery County, they're large, they're highly populated, but it's like, I don't think I could tell you the name of a single person who lives in my building. And maybe that's what we need to bring, is that we are this party of family values and this party of knowing and loving your neighbor. And that's something that comes from biblical teachings as well, is how do we reach out and say, we are the party of community. We're not out rioting in the streets. We're out trying to clean up the streets and be, family with our communities and the people that we're serving.
One of the things that the counties that have become so Republican, you mentioned Garrett, which of course the Western Maryland has had a longstanding Republican tradition going back to the Civil War, but on the shore, really the Republican registration majorities are of a more recent vintage. And one of the things that they've done is do a great job of successfully registering Republican, and that's definitely an area in which Republicans across the state can really learn from, is their success in doing a better job of identifying people who are primed to register as Republican. Kind of, what are your thoughts on what we can learn from that? Well,
jumping back a little bit, when I was the precinct chairman in 1333, which is Kent Mill in Montgomery County, in order to become a precinct chairman, you had to get through the precinct chairman school. And one of the efforts was the Neighbor to Neighbor campaign. Are you familiar with the Neighbor to Neighbor
Sure.
campaign?
Yep, absolutely.
It means that you had to knock on a minimum of 100 doors, give the Republican newsletter, and actually ask for a contribution. People didn't have to give a contribution, but when people would make that investment of $5, I remember the guy who gave, I think it was $50, and this is back in 1980. That was real money. And I said, how much change do you want back? And he said, no. He essentially said, I'm investing in the future for my kids. People want to be involved. People want to be asked. And if there are auxiliary groups, whether it's college Republicans, young Republicans, business leaders, veterans, all of these different groups, if you're active in politics, it doesn't stop at the Republican Party headquarters. You're actually part of the community, and the more people get to know that, hey, the Republican Party looks just like me, because the Republican Party is everybody, then the more comfortable people will feel in that milieu.
Neighbor to Neighbor, correct me if I'm wrong, was more focused on existing Republicans. And, one of the challenges that we have in the current environment is you've got sort of two very, very different echo chambers that basically don't hear what the other are saying. And it's a challenge to break through that, isn't it?
Absolutely. But, and you're right, that's an excellent point. When it was neighbor to neighbor, it was really Republican neighbor to Republican neighbor. And then knowing that the number one reason why a person chooses their political party is because it's what their parents are. By the way, the number two reason is because it's what their parents aren't. But when you're,
it's interesting dynamic there, yes.
But when you knock on that Republican door and you say, do you have a kid that needs to register to vote, or do you have somebody who's just moving into the neighborhood? It's a chance to expand that pie. But you're right, we do have to do outreach to non-traditional Republicans. But if you're a Republican who knocks on a dark blue door with a Biden Cardin sign, your chances of actually changing a mind pretty slim. But if you find somebody who a Democrat who has a Trump sign, and I know there aren't many of those this past time around, that gives you something to talk about. Or you can look for other telltale signs. It used to be a shotgun rack in the back of a car or a truck, but I don't think they have those in Montgomery County anymore. Except for in the North County.
Well, I was going to say, it pulls. Well, go ahead, Don. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry, Al, and I agree with what you're saying there. And I'm, having you lived in Montgomery County. I've lived pretty much my entire life in Montgomery County. I agree with what you're saying about the, we need to have people will, they want to associate with people who are like them, all that familiarity. Also the idea of, Democrats, why we have a lot of, registered Democrats, because it's their parents and type of thing like this. I'm just wondering, and looking at kind of maybe Larry Hogan as kind of the example, for better, for worse, depending upon how the Republicans feel about him. But, is not Hogan, like for Montgomery County, kind of a model in the sense of looking for more bipartisan issues in order to reach out to the Democrats or something like that? Just because we're so far outnumbered in Montgomery County, it's not even funny. There are others that are worse, I think, throughout the state. But living here is just, it's always like you're just running against this wall. This is really hard to do. But if we found some more middle ground, and I'm not saying compromise Republican principles, but there probably are things that we are agreeing on. I mean, to an extent, what Robin Ficker has done has transcended that. He has found issues. He's done things that have gotten people on board to get things that I never thought would ever get passed in Montgomery County. And so he's reached out and done that. Can we find a way to use that model in Montgomery County and maybe some of the other counties that are also where their backs up against the wall with the registration? What are our chances? What are the odds that we can narrow that gap by using some kind of bipartisan middle ground type of a strategy?
Well, Don, you and I, we're old enough to remember when Montgomery County would regularly elect Republicans. And the first 2 or 3 county executives were Republicans. We had Gil Goody and Newton Steers and Connie Morella. They may not be the ideal fit, as I said, for Idaho. Although, frankly, Gil Goody had some good common sense. Newt was a loyal Republican. Newt Steers was a very loyal Republican. So there was a time when the Democrats thought that they didn't stand a chance there, and they felt sorry for this guy, young lawyer Mike Barnes, and they let him get the nomination. So as hopeless as it was for the Democrats once, it's equally hopeless for us now. We have a potential, but that means we've got to reach out, as you're saying, to people on common issues. And you can even call them the Ficker issues. The 2-cent option, whatever. Do you remember the trim resolution that came out of Prince George's County, probably mid 1980s, that capped the taxes, and that stood for 20 years, but that passed by referendum. So yeah, the referendum, things like that. Another thing that Montgomery County has going for it, by the way, is you have a lot, and Baltimore County doesn't have this at all. You have incorporated cities, which means that you've got a chance to get people elected not only to nonpartisan offices, not only partisan offices, but nonpartisan offices. And that's when they could find out that, hey, Republicans don't necessarily bite. That they work and play well with Democrats for the interests of their community. And from there, you could use that as a launchpad. And by the way, that also goes for PTA. That also goes for all kinds of organizations, and gives people a chance to get to know somebody in a non-threatening way.
Yeah, and you also bring up a good point. Last winter I was out collecting signatures for 9D, and we never presented it as a Republican issue because it really, at the end of the day, wasn't. And I'm sure that, and we never asked for people's voter registration where they fell, only if they were registered to vote in Montgomery County. And I guarantee you, a lot of the people I spoke to were Democrats. But if you explain it, we're collecting signatures for a vote for a ballot initiative on equal representation of Montgomery County. That's something that nobody would say no to. That there's nothing that sounds unreasonable about that from any kind of partisan issue. And I think that there is hope in Montgomery County in that sense, is when you don't, as soon as you stick a letter on something, people are going to vote down ballot for whatever side they're on. But when you phrase it as, just this is a community issue. It has nothing to do with left or right. I feel like that's where you find that common ground.
So go ahead. Sorry, Al.
That's actually one of those issues that is so nonpartisan. I'm not sure that it's it's a great way of getting to be known in your community, but it's not it's not a cutting edge issue. If you get people to sign something that goes for a tax cap, and you've got a list of people who have an interest in tax cap, you cross-check that against your voter list, and you found a whole bunch of people to go say, do you want to go get involved with, have you thought about re-registering, because obviously taxes are important to you.
So now that you're an officer of the state party, do you have some specific initiatives that you're interested to take on as a vice chair?
It's coalition building. I talked an awful lot about reaching out to immigrants, or about 12% of Marylanders were not born in this country, and in Montgomery, in Maryland schools, I believe it's almost 19% of all students have at least one parent who is an immigrant. We can't see this, these votes. And by the way, it's also the right thing to do. But people didn't come to America to get socialism. They've got socialism where they were. They came to America because they were looking for safety, and they were looking for opportunity, which, by the way, sounds a whole lot like why most people who became Republicans, because they believe in safety, and they believe in opportunity, and they believe that if they work hard and do well, they deserve to be rewarded. So I want to do an awful lot of reach out to that area. I heard on Chris Plant, a guy who had come from Canada, and he said, no sooner did he register, did he take the oath of citizenship, then the Democrats descended on him like, and I quote, dogs who were going after luncheon meat in his pocket. We've got to be doing the same. We can't just assume that this is a lost cause. It used to be that every time that the Democrats would lose a war, the Republicans would gain a voting block. Now that happened certainly with Korea. It happened with Laos and Vietnam, and to to a lesser extent with Cambodia. But we've got an awful lot of Asians that we really need to reach out to, because they share our belief in quality education, and that people who work hard should be rewarded.
That is, in Montgomery County, that's been one of the real challenges, is the frustration on the part of the Asian community with the direction of the school system. And of course, as you mentioned, particularly in Howard County, has a very high percentage of Asian voters to reach out to.
So, and another is veterans. I don't actually have a great way into the VFW and American Legion, but these are people who risked it all for America, and it makes no sense for them to be, they didn't do that all so they could have socialism.
One of the interesting sidebar issues to the Hispanic vote is there is a tendency for the Democrats to look at them all together. And as you've talked about, there are specific countries, obviously the Venezuelan vote, many of them have fled socialism. In specific Central American countries, they're sort of here as a result of the domestic politics in their own country. Here in Montgomery County, the sort of the largest Hispanic bloc comes from El Salvador, which has had its own kind of history that's cut a number of different ways.
Absolutely. I worked in the Reagan White House for as an intern, during the Contra days, and there are an awful lot of people who came from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua, that its natural inclination is to go Republican. They didn't come here because they were really pleased with socialism, but they wanted the capitalist model, whether they were calling it that or not, and they want the rule of law. And I have to tell you that I'm sure when they see riots in the streets like we saw in Michigan, over the summer, they were not pleased. They feel threatened. People who own businesses that were being burned, that was a warning to those who own businesses that aren't being burned. So I think that's a natural Republican coalition.
Share with me a little bit about your approach to recruiting candidates. What do you look for, and how do you encourage them to run?
The first trick is we've got to know the borders. So it's going to be if somebody's running for a county council at large, it's kind of easy because you know where the county is.
Right.
But if it's hard for a county party chairman, or by the way, everybody is part of the recruiting team. It's part of the Republican posse, is what I call it. We've got to go out and we've got to round up the people that we need. But we want people who. It's not enough to agree with them, and it's not enough that they be smart. And by the way, they don't have to be telegenic. You could even argue that politics is show business for ugly people. But you've heard that line, I could tell. But the opportunities are plentiful for people who are part of their neighborhood, who people like to be around. There are some people who are great candidates. There are some people who are great campaign managers. Seldom do you come into contact with somebody who is both. So you've got the people who want to be on the center of the stage, and people have to feel comfortable knocking on doors. It's not a place for the timid. But there's also going to be a need for the people who you also need to recruit to be the treasurer. By the way, being the treasurer is in some ways the most important part of the campaign, because that's the only one who could go to jail or get you in jail.
That's a good way to recruit people who want to be treasurer. I know Jackie was dying to become a treasurer, and Don is
get out.
Don is looking to escape the mantle of having been treasurer. He knows from having taken over from me in at least Montgomery County.
My question was, do I need to do math? Because I don't math.
The first time my name ever appeared over the State Board of Election over at Sable was as Al Bullock's, Katja Bullock's husband, Katja's husband, Al's treasurer. So I never went to jail for it.
It's setting a very low bar, I know.
Al,
out without a criminal record.
Al, in looking at all of these things that you want to do, and the state party as a whole wants to do, I kind of want to get your feelings about what you or what Dirk or others are thinking, or how you're adjusting based on the fact that the pandemic has really put us in a really unusual situation. Traditional campaigning really hasn't been able to do what it has in the past. We're going to get out of this thing eventually, but at least in the short term, how do you try to accomplish or move your goals forward in terms of recruitment and all the coalition building, when we really are very limited in how we can meet people?
Just remember that everything that's happening to us is also happening to the Democrats. So we're all kind of driving under a yellow flag, using a NASCAR analogy. It's terrific that the YRs are doing such great job texting, and I love texting. I had done some during my my campaign for Central Committee Vice Chair, because think of it this way. If I were to ask you, what's the last email you got, you couldn't tell me. But if I were to say, what's the last text you got, there's an excellent chance you could tell me. So that's so texting is terrific. The other thing is, if you've got somebody who you're trying to excite, write them a personal email, or even better, a personal letter. Just even a thank you note, or I'm sorry I've been missing you at church or at school. I am trying to work on building the Republican Party here in your case, in Montgomery County. What do you think of that? And toss, give somebody something to think about. The Christmas card list has always been a major part of starting a campaign. And the more people you know who like you, the better it is.
I mean, I think you're spot on, and I don't know about you, but the way that I was raised was always like, if somebody gets you a gift, no matter how small, you send them a thank you card. Or if you go to a job interview, you send a follow-up thank you or something. It's just like, there's power in the written word, or just picking up the phone. As effective as texting is to reaching out to young voters, there's something I think still to be said for sending a letter or picking up the phone and making a phone call. And even though, most people that you don't know won't answer a call from a stranger, reaching out to the people that you know over the phone, I think is incredibly effective. But, and Al, I know that this is what you do for a living. I've also been trying to convince the YRs that print and direct mail is highly effective, or would be highly effective, to reaching out to young people. When I first moved to Maryland, one of the first pieces of mail I got, because I could say I very rarely get mail these days because everything happens digitally. One of the first pieces of mail I got was from MFRW. Welcome to Maryland. Thank you for registering as a Republican. These are the events we have coming up. And as a young person who doesn't get a lot of mail, that's something that catches your eye. And I think that that's something that we do underestimate. And I do a little bit of print production in my day job. So I'm a fan of it as well, is that it really, I think it is a good option for reaching out to young voters still, at least for getting them involved.
One of the reasons I'm so delighted to hear you say that is I think I did that mailing for the MFRW.
So at the outset, we were talking about the fact that you went to school for a while in Georgia, which almost qualifies you as an old hand in Georgia. And I know, Jackie, you're going down to Georgia. So Al, what can you tell us about the Georgia runoffs?
I had done
Since you're an expert on Georgia, right?
I actually will tell you that an awful lot has changed in Georgia.
I think,
since I was there. By the way, the biggest change to Georgia came with the Olympics. That completely changed the entire feel of Georgia forever. Highways were built. The large Atlanta was changed, and that's why whenever anybody says, for the next Olympics, let's see what we could do about getting it into Baltimore, Washington, I always say no. You don't want to do that. But that putting that aside, the Georgia is an interesting place. It's kind of my fear is that it will become another Illinois, where you've got hundreds and hundreds of square mile of great Republican territory, and then you've got Chicago. My fear is that Georgia, which is the largest state east of the Mississippi, a trivia fact you never would have thought of, has just an absolutely terrific Republican Party everywhere except for Atlanta. Don't get me wrong, Savannah will send somebody, will send a Democrat to Congress, or different places from time to time. But I'm afraid that Atlanta is going to be the city that eats Georgia.
Well, does the pandemic and the results of the pandemic change your mind? Because we've started to see, since remote work is becoming so popular, this mass exodus from a lot of large cities. We're seeing in New York, we're seeing it from LA, because essentially people can work these tech jobs, these big business jobs from their homes. So why would they pay city prices and city rents when they could move to the suburbs?
I'm not going to argue. My daughter's apartment in Manhattan came down. The price of it came down substantially before she moved in because the pandemic had started, and there's lots of vacancy. The question is, where are these people moving?
Yeah.
And who is moving? If the liberals move from Manhattan and move to Florida, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
But if they move from there to Montgomery County, it's kind of a wash, other than the fact that I'm a Marylander.
Yeah, we need to spread them out far enough that they don't make too much of a difference. Make them all not pop in one place.
It's an interesting observation some folks make about the demographics that takes place. And I was struck by a comment you made before about parents being the biggest influence in their choice. Obviously, sometimes kids decide to go in the opposite direction. And one of the fascinating things that exists is the fact that the more kids a woman has, obviously some women don't have kids, but the more sort of family size, the more likely they are to be conservative. So the sort of the revenge of the cradle, if you will, is the prospect that the children of women with larger families are more likely to be conservative. It ends up becoming a potential source of strength in the future.
Is that like a religious thing, you think, just because?
Well, there is that component, but there is a continuum that you can do of political affiliation by the number of children. And
I don't know, because my brain just went to the only family that I know that they have 5 kids. That whole family is deep, deep blue.
Well,
overall,
yeah.
Yes, yeah.
The Orthodox Jews and Muslims are, they have more progeny than anybody else. It used to be when I was growing up that there were the kids who went to Catholic school had 5 and 6 brothers and sisters,
right.
But you don't see that anymore, or at least I don't.
That's a lot of college tuition.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a chunk of it. But we're making social decisions based off of economic reality. That's a mark of a Republican. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of this crosscuts.
Well, we are coming up on the end of the show. So Al, we like to take the end of the show to give you an opportunity to say whatever you want to say, plug what you want to plug. How can people find you or reach out to you if they want to get involved with the state party?
Well, I think everybody knows my cell phone, but I'm going to give it to you again, which is 410-419-9068. If you ever have a great idea, give me a call and I'll make sure not to give you the credit when I use it. No, I'm kidding. The truth of all of this is that we're all everybody dreams when they're first getting involved in politics. Wouldn't it be so cool to be the honorable, the ambassador? Well, you are all the honorable. You are all the ambassadors. You're the ambassador to every church and synagogue group. You're the ambassador to every veterans or immigrant group, or you're the ambassador to your PTA, and you're there to spread the Republican message. And as you're spreading that message, make sure you have some voter registration cards in your pocket. I thought not long ago that the voter registration was dead because we were doing in-person same-day registration. But it's very important for us to actually find out who these registered voters are. So let's keep doing that voter registration. Let's keep doing the follow-up. And if you're the one who takes that card to register them and you send them a thank you note, that just reinforces and say, so glad I had the chance to register you. It's the honor of my lifetime that I've had a chance to form this. I'd love to get you involved in the Young Republicans College Republican, Maryland Federation of Republican Women, whatever. Or, you know, I not being a woman myself, I can't bring them to a Maryland Federation of Republican Women event, but I could say, you know, I know somebody your age, your community. Could I have them reach out to you and invite you? This is just the same thing as it always has been. It's the usher in the church or the synagogue that makes you feel welcome. And if we have to make people feel welcome.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great message to end on. Al, thank you so much for joining us. Thank everybody who's watching us
Great.
for joining us. And we will see you next Wednesday with another exciting guest.